Okay, in our last set of PowerPoints, we talked about general requirements for transition planning and the IEP and timelines to follow. So let's get a little bit more in depth and let's talk about turning some of those assessment results that we have into actual goal and objective statements that can be written into the IEP. Just as a matter of review, just the agenda, we're talking about that legal framework and then actually moving into writing the goals and objectives. I mentioned indicator 13 and 14. Indicator 13, which is part of the the SPP, the School Performance Plan indicator, that the federal government collects data on. That has to do with the presence of transition planning in the IEP. And what indicator 13 is looking for is evidence that states are mandating their schools and that schools are actually implementing transition planning in all of these domain areas that we've talked about, that they're actually making, course of study decisions, that they're actually representing multiple domains of planning and assessment. Consider your own school setting and planning that may be taking place and whether or not that is indeed being done in the setting in which you work if you are a practicing teacher. Then indicator 14 actually looks at high school outcomes, and that lends itself to a lot of national level studies that have been done. For example, National Longitudinal Transition Study done out of Palo Alto, California is probably the longest and largest longitudinal study of post-school outcomes for students with disabilities, and a lot of the information has been usable by states and by programs to actually evaluate their own practices in terms of what they're doing that may or may not be leading to successful outcomes for students. So obviously we want to collect post-school outcomes on our students through the state systems as well, so that we're able to meet that indicator and be able to show how our students are doing once they leave school. If they're not faring as we would like them to fare, then it lends itself perhaps back to looking at your program and its efficacy and its components to see if things could be done a little bit better. Okay. Now, let's get into this concept of writing those post-secondary goals. If you looked at that IEP form, you saw that there was that front part which actually kind of talked about that big vision that you want for the student in terms of where they're going to live, where they anticipate living, what the type of setting they anticipate living in. Not that they want to live on a particular street, but do they want to live with a roommate? Do they want to live alone? Does the family decide that maybe a good outcome for this student would be to go into a supported living type of situation? The same thing with work. Do they want to go into competitive employment? Is there a particular career area that they're interested in? If they want to go into supported employment, then what is that vision? What is that goal for the student? And we need to move that student systematically toward that, which means that we need to be able to write goals that are going to go into the IEP that actually address these areas. Education and training in post-secondary years, employment, independent living skills. And independent living skills can actually be looked at more broadly in terms of daily living skills, personal social skills, community access skills. Basically what we're doing when we're not working or going to school is what we're calling independent living skills. When we're talking about writing appropriate post-secondary goals for education and training, depending on where that student's going, and remember we're talking about pathways again, then not every pathway is the same for every student. So in this vision statement, you might write a view of, and as you're completing the visioning activity for this module, look at what this student's anticipated outcome is. Billy will attend a four-year university and study economics. Billy will go into a post-secondary vocational school to study auto mechanics. Those are the types of things that we're talking about as far as vision statements for those students. In terms of employment, what type of, not only what level of employment, but what career area of employment is someone interested in. And it may be that one of the first goals that we write in the employment area is that the student will acquire experiences or have experiences that will allow him or her to make informed choices about about potential employment options, or even volunteerism, or even the military. All of these things fit under this, and even school attendance, to be perfectly honest, fits, for all intents and purposes, under the rubric of employment, although we kind of parse out post-secondary education and employment because they really do represent two immediate tracks. We're also talking about, if you say, well, employment comes as the result of going to post-secondary education, what we're talking about is having that vision for what's going to happen to that student once he leaves that K-12 setting. Not what's going to happen, 6 years or 10 years or 12 years down the line. We have no control over that. What we can influence and what we can program to is what's going to happen to that student once they leave that K-12 system. And yes, if they go into post-secondary education, hopefully ultimately they'll gain meaningful employment in that area. But we can't predict to that level nor be involved to that level, but what we can do is we can do everything we can to prepare him to move into that next environment, which is this post-secondary educational setting. So we have to think about our own restrictions as far as how far-reaching we are in terms of setting those post-school goals. Same thing with independent living skills. Deciding this is an individual that may leave school and go into supported living, for example. And that's fine. And that's that vision for when they leave school. Now, as that person ages, that person may remain in that setting. That person may move to a less restrictive type of living environment. But that's something that would be facilitated by whatever supports that person is accessing as an adult. That's not something that, again, we can predict 5 or 6 or 10 years down the road that this is going to happen. So we look at, as this person is exiting the school system, what exactly is it that we're going to be moving them toward, and that is what we plan our goals and objectives on, not what might happen 5 or 6 or 10 years down the road. We want to be able to make sure that we use results-oriented terms when we're creating both our vision and our goal statements. Enrolled in, worked in, working full-time, working part-time. We want it to be measurable. When we go back and do, or when the state goes back, or when the district goes back, or whoever goes back and does post-school follow-up to collect information on that indicator 14, excuse me, they're going to want to have data that's measurable that says, yes, we have X number of students who are enrolled in post-secondary education settings at least half-time. We have X number of students who are working in competitive employment at least part-time or are working full-time. So these are things that are measurable. We want to have information about, this is a person who is living in a supervised living situation with supervision once a week from an outside agency. That's the level of specificity that we want to be able to have. Unless we can be specific about what it is that we're shooting for, we can't be specific in how it is that we're going to get there. So just as we say with academic skills, we don't say Billy will improve in reading. Well, gosh, isn't that why Billy's in school, to improve in reading? So that's not measurable. It's when we say what it is exactly we're looking at that would indicate that he is improving in reading. That becomes a measurable, actionable verb. Okay, or Billy will know his sounds. We don't know what know his sounds mean. Does it mean that he can identify them auditorily? Does it mean he can replicate them? Does it mean he can use them in words? We don't know. So just as we are very cautious with our academic goals and objectives, we need to be very cautious with our perhaps more non-academic, functional daily living skills types of goals and objectives to make sure that the information we're sharing is indeed measurable. So here's some examples of something that's measurable. Bob will be enrolled part-time in an emergency medical technician training program. Now, this would be a good goal statement for him once he leaves school. He's probably not going to do it while he's K-12, but this would be a good vision statement. While he's in K-12, you might have a goal that says Bob will be able to identify 3 different programs for emergency medical technician training. That's something he can work on now. That's something you can work on now. So you need to be cognizant when you're talking about IEP goals. Is it something the student could actually do right now? Or is it really just a vision for what it is he wants to do? And are there more tangible, realistic things that he can be doing leading up to that that could result in that visionary statement? Same thing here. Mary will be enrolled full-time at Western Community College. Now, that's not going to happen while she's in K-12. That is her goal statement. We hope as a result, again, 5, 6, 10 years down the road, that full enrollment will result in an employment in the area of computer science. We would love that. But her primary objective is to do whatever we need to do to get her into that educational setting with the skills that we're teaching her to be able to do that, not just academics, but again, time management, personal social skills, all of those things that are necessary to be in that type of environment. And that as a result of that, our vision for her will be that she'll be enrolled full-time once she leaves us in the K-12 setting. To lead up to that point, again, think of goal statements that you could accomplish within a year's time while you still have Mary in the K-12 setting. That she will seek out 3 different community colleges that provide her program. That she will be able to demonstrate. That's not a good verb, but she'll be able to. To demonstrate adequate use of study skills, that she will be able to have the correct transportation skills to get to and from school. Those are things that are goal statements that you can work on now that will lead to this vision of Mary once she leaves you entering full-time into that community college. Same thing with employment. This is a good vision statement. It's not something that's going to happen while he's in K-12. But what does he need? What skills does he need to be able to build? If this is his vision, what skills does he need to be able to build to be able to move into that type of scenario? Now, he's probably going to have to go to fire academy or EMS training once he leaves school. So what skills does he need to get into that? What does your assessment tell you that he still needs to learn? Are there certain academic skills that he needs to learn to be able to move into that type of training or into that type of service? If so, then that becomes your goal statement. And you may have several goal statements that would lead just to this employment outcome. Same thing, independent living. She's not going to live independently on her own while she's in K-12, but we want her, if that's her vision, once she graduates from us, not 5, 6, 10 years down the road, but once she graduates from K-12, if that's her vision, then what skills does she need to be able to do that? What skills does she presently have? And those become your goal statements. That your goal statements revolve around her ability to demonstrate those skills essential to being able to live independently. Bill paying, cooking, washing, simple maintenance, all of those types of things that enable you to live independently. And whatever skills she doesn't have within those larger domains can become your goal statements that you can work on from year to year in your IEP to acquire those skills. Okay, then when you get to the objectives, you play down from those. Remember, objectives always need to contain condition, a behavior, criteria. We know that, we know that, we know that. So if we have these general goal statements, these examples that I've given, then those need to be broken down into observable, measurable sub-steps that you're going to accomplish during the course of that year. So for example, if we go back and we say that somebody will identify 3 different institutions where they can study a certain course of study, a computer science course of study, then you may have 3 or 4 short-term objectives during that year that enable that goal to be met for that particular year. Okay? So it's, again, we all know how to write goals and objectives. The objectives are stepping stones to meet our goal, but our goal in and of itself needs to be observable and measurable. Okay? Again, with the condition, the situation, the material, the setting. Okay, in her computer science class, Mary will, and you can have performance standards from her computer science class. That would be part of her goal. That would help build her movement toward that post-secondary computer science setting. If you're looking at that goal of she'll be able to identify 3 places to go, then goals may be that within her English class, that Mary will research using the internet and search terms of how to locate appropriate school settings and attach a criterion to that. Okay, so it's all about taking it from the big picture, the vision, down to the goal. What can we work on this year to make that goal happen, to work toward that goal, that vision that that student has? That's our goal statement. And then within that, how do we break that down into stepping stones that we can accomplish this year to meet that goal that then contributes to that larger vision? Okay, again, remember, we want this to be, what does the student do? We want it to be measurable. We want it to be observable types of things. I think it's probably much easier for teachers to do this when they're thinking about academic skills, but it's a little bit more challenging when you're talking about functional skills. But the or daily living or personal social skills, because they may seem a little bit more ambiguous. So it's a challenge to be able to say, yes, this is something measurable both at the goal level and at the short-term objective level, that is measurable, observable, and recordable. Okay. Specify number of credit, and we all know this with the criteria. Someone who's got as a goal that he's going to learn how to travel independently among the community and that's something that could be a goal for during the K-12 time, leading toward that vision of moving into one's own apartment, for example. One needs to have community mobility. So, an example of a bad goal for that would be that, or a bad short-term objective would be that Billy will learn to cross the street with 90% accuracy. Okay, you need to be realistic. A lot of skills, when we're talking about daily living skills, they just really lend themselves to 100%. That anything less than that is close enough, it's not good enough. Crossing the street with 90% accuracy is not close enough. Getting correct change back with 80% accuracy is 20% of the time allowing that that you will be cheated. So you need to be, I think, reasonable and logical about how it is that you are setting those criteria and those behaviors for your short-term objectives that are going to lead to what you're doing for that goal this year. This goal, of course, over several years leading to whatever the student needs to move into that vision. And here's just a good example. See, now this is a good example of, given a list of 25 environmental signs, he will orally read the words with 100% accuracy. We would hope that he could actually do it with 100% accuracy outside of the school setting as well, because many of these things, if you don't read them correctly, you are in big trouble. So this would be a good example of where maybe close enough might not be good enough. So again, something to keep in mind as you're creating those especially those objective statements. Okay, and then finally, remember that part of the IEP planning process is to indicate who's responsible for carrying out that particular goal, and it may be partially you. It may be you as a classroom teacher in connection with a related service person. It may be you in collaboration with a school counselor in terms of seeking out post-secondary options. There could be all different ways that these goals and objectives can be met that may go beyond just you as the classroom teacher. So thinking about, if I were going to call in my resources to help deliver this instruction for these goals and objectives, who logically, both within my school setting and even in the community, might be appropriate to help me carry this out? So again, just this idea of coordinated set of activities takes a face. It has a face here because we're saying, this is what I want to accomplish with this student. These are the people who might help me do it. So familiarizing yourself with what your resources are in your community, therefore, and in your school, are essential toward being able to really deliver a coordinated set of activities and not put the complete onus of that delivery on you as the classroom teacher. Same thing with instruction. Okay, the same type of scenario. Are there players around that could be part of the team that could help deliver the needed instruction? I used, for example, the speech therapist in my last high school that I taught in to really co-teach with me when we were teaching personal social skills in terms of breaking into conversations and staying on topic with conversations and all those things, because those are pragmatic language skills. And certainly she had expertise in that area that I didn't have. And so we would co-teach that together, and I found that to be a valuable resource in a way that I never would have really thought of using a speech therapist before until I really understood what it was, what they have for a knowledge base that could help me to do that. So thinking outside the box in terms of providing instruction. Is there something that if you could bring the parents in to help deliver instruction of something you're teaching in the classroom and take it into a community setting for practice? Fabulous. That would be a wonderful thing to do. So think outside the box as far as how we can make this a team effort. With employment, what role can employers play in delivering these IEP goals? Are there ways that they can help you understand what is needed to move into their employment setting so that you can logically assess and set goals for these students? Absolutely. Can they come to class and provide overviews of their workplaces to help students during job shadowing or job awareness, work awareness types of experiences when they are in middle school? Can they come and talk about their workplace? Can they facilitate visits of those workplaces? Absolutely. So again, when we're talking about who's going to help carry out those things that are in your IEP, as far as goals and objectives, keep in mind that we have resources that are rich for us beyond just our classroom. However, also keep in mind that you have no jurisdiction as a classroom teacher to force employers to come. And if they say, oh gee, I can't come now and do this, that doesn't mean that you just toss out that goal or that objective. You still need to find a way to provide it because it's essential for that student's growth. So while it's a good news, bad news things, there are richness of resources out there to help us deliver on those IEP goals, but also we don't have any jurisdiction to actually force them to do that. So that's why building those good partnerships are so important. Again, related services we talked about. We want students to be able to acquire acquisition of daily living skills. This is something that really should be a strong, in doing these goals and objectives, should really be a strong communication, again, with the family setting, because most of these skills you will not have the opportunity to see these kids carry out within your jurisdiction as a classroom teacher. And we really need to rely heavily on that partnership with home as much as we possibly can to make sure that these students have opportunities to be able to engage in these types of skills that we're putting into our IEPs. Community-based experiences, I had mentioned before that where we carry out our instruction is important, that as much as possible when we are talking about especially skills that lead to functional performance, daily living skills, personal social skills, pre-employment skills, community access skills, that we as much as possible try to use community referenced, meaning perhaps even materials from our own community referenced materials, at the very least, optimally to use community-based instruction to be able to give a context, a real-life context to what it is that we're teaching. So when you are planning IEP goals and objectives, if it is something that a student needs to learn, if you can possibly deliver it in the setting where it would be most appropriate, fabulous. If not, then at least try to replicate that as closely as possible as you do that instruction. And then the same thing with other post-school adult living objectives. Again, keep in mind that there are adult service agencies that you need to know about that can provide important information. Every state has an independent living center network. Every state has a developmental disabilities council. Every state has a parent education network system. Every state has a division of vocational rehabilitation network. There are a multitude of omnipresent types of resources available to us, and then there's also, of course, locally run types of support services as well. So a good place to find out this information is through the local transition council. Most school districts that I've encountered here in the state of Pennsylvania have district transition councils, and they or IU level transition councils at the very least. And that's a good place to go and learn about the different providers, become acquainted with who they are. Also, the Pennsylvania Secondary Transition.org material that I've provided for you is a good place to learn about the resources that are available to you. So keep in mind, again, as you are planning goals and objectives, plan them as the student needs them. Don't plan them based on whether or not you think you have the resources to deliver them. Because the former is student-centered, the latter is not. We want to be student-centered at all times. So rather than say, I can't teach this because I don't have the resources to teach it, find out what your resources are. And functional vocational evaluation is something that can be done through Voc Rehab. It can be partially done through the vocational education system through your district or IU. It's a way for those individuals who perhaps are not higher education bound, or even if they are, just to develop a sense of the work readiness skills that individuals have or interests that they have. Engaging in a functional vocational evaluation might be something that you could do during the assessment process that could provide valuable information to add into your present level of academic and functional performance, and therefore translate into course of study and IEP goals and objectives.